Hey everybody. Almost touched my face, but didn't do it. Hey, cool. How are you? I hope you're making it through this day and finding some things to enjoy, despite the having been through them all probably a million times already. It certainly is the beginning of the middle game, but those of us who are ER minded are not that patient people. So we're already figuring out, how can we end this? It sucks. It hurts people, and we want to see a change. We also want to get to the vast volume of emergencies that we think that we're probably missing. So there's the epidemic or pandemic. There is its creeping kind of nature as it moves into vulnerable places like Ethiopia and wherever it's kind of starting its slow creep. And the pockets of vulnerabilities that it exploits in the populations of people in our city, if you imagine that as one body. And that's one way to do it. But there is food supply chains that we need to tend to. We need to start planting crops soon in the northern hemisphere. There are people who once were able to travel freely as migrant workers to help us gather our strawberries and lettuce and blueberries. So there's a lot to tend to. So we need to be methodical about trying to quell this as ardently and intelligently as possible. And to be honest with you, I'm cautiously excited. Touch my face, shit. Cautiously excited about some possibilities I'm working on with some people modeling ways to be both minimize risk and to imagine not just flattening this curve, but trending it towards zero by involving you and your intelligence and commitment and solidarity, knowing that if people just kind of live with this kind of loosey-goosey, just stay home type of advice, then it's going to probably start to fall on deaf ears. And we want to do what we know is possible, which is respond to this in a community way that gives us the lived intelligence about how to face something like this in the future. Not just here, but in Mexico and Ethiopia and Taiwan and all those places. So that's a strategy that we're working on right now. And when I was talking to some news reporters today about something that I mentioned in my previous book, Life on the Ground Floor, that medicine is an example of life caring for itself, I can't not see that. I can't stop seeing that. I can't stop seeing that those internet cables that run across the ocean carrying information, the RNA code of the coronavirus, SARS-CoV-2, the information cables carrying that RNA code that the Chinese were actually the first to sequence and then obviously shared to others so we could watch the mutations and start to work on vaccines. For me, it's not that dissimilar to the capillaries of a human body that is receiving information from a T cell somewhere in the bloodstream that's encountered this virus first and now is sending protein signals saying, this is what the virus appears like. You know, we have a vague impression of it now, but so you get this initial immune response. And then what happens is it's coarse and it doesn't catch all of the pathogen, the viruses. So, but you get sick. And But eventually your body starts to, oh, now I'm getting the signal. Now I'm starting to figure out exactly what makes this thing up. And I'm going to start to, the way that I'm going to know how to identify it is I'm going to start to present these little pieces of the virus on the surface of my cell. Touch my face. And then you beat the virus back and you become immune and you don't have to face it exactly again. So I can't help but think that that's what is part of what's happening as we share information like we're doing. And now we're mounting a more intelligent response, given we have part of our collective body, like Italy and China and New York, are becoming more intelligent about how to face this. So we're offering greater protection. We're getting greater protection here in Toronto through aggressive social or physical distancing, but also learning how the infection works. So it seems like a more robust response is possible, and that's what we're working for. Not just to keep us safe in the ER, but make sure patients are safe, and then eventually just dead this thing. And the models that we're working on now, and I can't really share it until we run it a few different times and bat it around, is hopefully going to speak to that, how we can imagine, even at this very early stage of a middle game, something like an end game, so we can all start to think about life as it creeps back into some semblance of normalcy. And at the same time as that happens, I think there are things that we'll want to remember from this time about how important it is to think about something like a city as getting well together, that there's no possibility to have a vulnerable population of people and be safe ourselves. So not housing the homeless is not something that makes sense at an ethical level. You feel bad for them or slightly sorry for them or something, but it makes sense to make them as healthy as possible, because it's possible, and B, everything's highly interconnected. So we get better together. And as we sort this out for ourselves, then now the attention turns to places like food supply chains to refugees in Yemen and the Syrians who are still lack infrastructure and relied on the generosity of places like Canada to continue to support them. We have this great untangling to do. But I think that right now in the ER, things are still stable. We have ventilator capacity. It's about 70%. The ventilators are 70% occupied, which is pretty good, actually. Better than usual. And the reason why that is the case is because we've stopped operations, and so less people are needing those vents. So we're also expanding the ventilator capacity as well. So we're shifting things around in our hospitals, exchanging resources, including protective equipment, between hospitals and patients in a very fluid way. But some of us are starting to suspect, well, this is how it should have worked out all along. And this maybe will show us a better version of how we could have been healthier in the first place. And so there's that sense of taking this not just from back to business as usual, but back to a new idea of how that old way of doing things was inefficient and flawed. And I'll just mention, now we're being asked to save our N95s. We're actually being asked at the end of our shift, instead of throwing them away, to give them back in case they can be autoclaved or sterilized or repurposed and reused. And so, of course, the question comes up, why aren't we doing that all the time? Sadly, it's the case. If someone comes in with a laceration and I have to sew their skin closed, it's all metal instruments, and there's like half a dozen in there, forceps and needle drivers and stuff like that. And you take this like fairly specific and finely smithed equipment, and you sew out the laceration and you chuck it in the fucking garbage. So I think that we're seeing that is probably, I hope that isn't the business we go back to. I hope that's not why we're facing this in this new way. The intention is to realize that our approach to living on the earth allowed this sickness to occur. And so in order to become immune to it at a population level, we have to change the way that we do things. And probably stop making the earth so sick at the same time. So I really am excited about those conversations that are going to be left actually to you to begin and follow through with, about what you discovered through this time, about how to live, what you need, what matters to you most. I've heard from more than one person, they look around their house and they didn't need all this shit. How did they get all this stuff? And now that we can't go to Canadian Tire and just buy a blender, I ask people, does anyone have an extra one? And everyone, lots of people do actually. They moved in together, they got married, so that's our collective responsibility. I can take on in the ER, we can take on in the ER our pleasure and obligation to help people to the limits of our ability, to give them the care that we believe is possible. And that's just how we've always done it. But I really encourage each of you to start taking a careful look around the world that now is kind of new, but maybe becoming slightly familiar. Finding what parts of it that you are emerging as nourishing and important to you, including the parts of your businesses that are surviving and naturally surviving, that are worth paying attention to, and really being deliberate about taking this post-pandemic into a version of the future that will make these 20s roar and filled with this sense of authenticity and good feeling, where we know that all that ever really mattered is the health of the people we care about and our own health, and that the stranger's health was somehow intercalated with mine and the earth's. And there's nothing more important than us to pay attention to, except that meeting that is art. Art and music and theater and dance, because it points at the ecstatic, the ephemeral, the beyond words, the direct pointing to God, or whatever when you phrase it, if you have a belief in that, or just a shared sense of like being fully and vibrantly alive. Because I know that, like you, I didn't ask to be here. I just woke up here, and no one seems to know what's going on. And we can find some sense of collective coming together around that idea, and make this a time where we reconsider our lives and what means the most to us. And I think what makes sense to me, based on what I'm hearing, and kind of had this intuition in seeing medicine in different places in the world, is extending a broader notion of caring that includes more and more people, so they feel safe to be who they are at a deeper and deeper level. So that's academic and esoteric. So I apologize for that, but it does make me think that we'll see the best of this, and we are seeing a little bit right now. You know, I love, you know, I don't really care about sports so much, but some, you know, a basketball player or baseball pitcher making $100 million. And the woman who's caring for your mom in the long-term care facility makes $60,000. I don't think so. That's a sign of unhealthiness to me. That is a sign of we needed this kind of shift, and I don't want it to stop us addressing it and making sure that your mother remains safe, and my father too, and my grandfather who's still alive, making them safe, and you all as well. But I do feel like it's a time where we get to reconsider. It seems like we've been in an abusive relationship with the earth, and just no one was really talking about it. We're just thinking like, I guess it's okay to dump a truckload of plastic bottles in the water every day. I don't know, I guess we can't help it. So that's the responsibility that I'm foisting on you to take from this experience and bringing it into our life, because that's the world that I want to live in, where we thrive and we dance and are free to show love and know that we're non-harming as much as possible, non-harming to the planet, non-harming to each other. And this is just like this great chance for us to see people coming together, you know, and it is true that if we did this in Toronto, as we're working so fastidiously on, then we can start spelling people off in New York City as well too. Why wouldn't we have that chance to give them that chance to rest and be with their families too? Okay, a couple clinical things, and then we'll move on to meditation. I just came out of a week of it, mostly silent. You know, I talked to you a couple times. I talked to my dad every day. We're both mourning the loss of my mom, as you know. So I'm there with him in that, and I was there with her this week, and it's still part of my life, and I'm learning so much about it. I wanted to bring up mutation and environmental pressure, just so I can explore my own weaknesses if you have a deeper understanding, which I'm sure several of you do. But last time I looked, the last paper I looked at was the virus has mutated into 2, so far as we can tell. And it seems like what they call the evolution, the beginning of this, which came from bats, same as SARS-1. I think it came from bats, and through pangolins to us or something. I think it mutated to a more aggressive form, so more contagious, maybe more aggressive. You know, it's tough. It was an abstract that I read, but the thing is about having a less aggressive form is that that ends up becoming more common, because the people with a more aggressive form get sick and they get symptomatic and they can't actually go out because they're too sick. And they're easy to identify because they get typical symptoms and they get breathless and they get swabbed and they get public health and all that stuff. So then what ends up happening is the trends kind of shift. So the people get this kind of population level aggressive disease, it kind of dies out because it's not as easy to spread around as the less aggressive one that makes people kind of sick, but they can kind of function. They spread that around because they're able to go to work or they're with their buddies, and you know. So I think that there's a real chance that this is something that can occur. And like I said, you'd have to be a virologist and study the course of how these viruses typically go, but most viruses they want to stick around, and this evolutionary pressure happens. If they make people sick and they kill lots of people, then especially quickly, then then they self-extinguish, right? So it's not a very great strategy if your intention is to keep on cruising around the planet like influenza does. You kind of want to make people kind of sick, but you don't want to kill them, especially not quickly, because you want to go on to, I don't know, do what viruses do. I guess they're having a good time or something. But just wanted to bring that up in terms of what I consider to be the models of this. I just keep an open mind. I don't know. I can just tell you that we're safe in Toronto. We have PPE, personal protective equipment. Apparently more is on the way. I don't know. We have space in the ICU. We have space in our ERs. We talk every day about this. We hear stories about it affecting, young people. In Alberta, a woman died in her 20s. And so at the initial stage, a bunch of us were like, let's just get it. And then now no one's really having that conversation. We're just like, let's just stay really super safe. So that's the strategy. I start in there tomorrow. Hey, Michael. Happy birthday, man. I start in there tomorrow for a bunch of shifts in a row. I'm really curious to get to know this illness more, because you can learn things. You just get the flavor for it. When I was in Sudan and I dealt with measles epidemic, you just could spot measles like walking through the gate after a little while. You just kind of are able to clock it. So one other piece of good news is that my friends who have been infected, they've recovered. One of them had asthma and she's fine. So that's good news as well too. I think that those are encouraging, signs. And we bought ourselves through your perseverance all this time. Now, the question becomes, how do we keep up your goodwill? How do we keep up your goodwill? How do we let you know that you're winning this with us, right? And so it needs in my opinion, it needs a more aggressive strategy beyond containment. And so I'm looking into that with some friends who are smarter than me, thank goodness, So I'm going to tell you more about that. It's very early stages, but that's something that's exciting me. Treatments, no one's really that excited about those right now. Whatever Trump is saying, I think needs to be taken kind of carefully as politically framed. So, I'll keep you updated as things come. I think that the infection rate is pretty stable, which is not, sounds okay, but that just means more cases. So it's, we're in a very fluid situation. What else can I tell you? Well, I meditated for a week, so we're going to get to that soon because I find that something that is helping me through this. But let me, before I get to that, if you have any questions you want to shoot to me on the Facebook Live thing, you can just throw that out right now. Otherwise, I will come to them later. You can drop them in the comments. I'll try to speak to them on Wednesday, April 8th. And hopefully I'll have some more answers as I get to know what's happening in the clinical way. Okay, cool. Well, I'll show you where I've been for the last week. This is my my meditation situation. And can you see that? So that's where I've been spending my days and nights. And I had I took into this meditation, this time of meditation, a couple things. One was how, I wanted to rest, give myself space in my experience to do what would come up in it that I needed to do. And I was hoping I would get to do some mourning and just be hurt a little bit. And because I don't think that we give ourselves that freedom sometimes, at least as clinicians and doctors. I know that you're getting a lot of time. You're getting a lot of time to yourself, so I'm sure you're like, get me out of my own head. But I think that for me, that's in the meditation I wanted just to kind of see what would emerge through it. And I came up with some things that are helping me through the grief, some ideas about how to work on this more aggressively, and really about getting into this conversation about where we want to go from here. How's the homeless? How do we want to have business kind of come back online? Which ones? And how do we want to get people back to work? How do we support the growth of our human spirit, through being more deliberate about caring about the arts and those things that unify us, like this painting, that give us like a moment where we step outside of ourselves, like this has done for all of us. And so I got a chance to sit, and I feel a sense of relief and nourishment in what I'm able to offer myself. And I'm really curious to hear from you about how you're not just making it through, but how you intend to grow. Because this is, as my teacher put it this week so often, this is, what did he say? Like enforced ashram. This is the meditation retreat you didn't ask for. So if you spend too much time lamenting what you've lost, or the future that no one, no matter what their epidemiologic credentials say, no one can tell you what it's going to look like. How do you give yourself what you need? How do you give yourself what you need? How do you sit with those uncertainties and yet still grow? So I'm going to phase this into meditation talk, and then we're going to do some, and then I'll let you guys get on with the rest of your lives. But there's this concept in Tibetan Buddhism called the bardo, and it's not that dissimilar to limbo, actually. It's not exactly purgatory in the Catholic sense, but something like it. But the idea is there's an in-between state, and it happens when you die, and sometimes when you die, before they believe that your consciousness is recycled into, there's a consciousness, that moves through you and passes through you to somewhere else. You're a piece of it for now, and you become a different piece of it at a different point after you die. And after you die, before you're reborn, and the point is not to be reborn again and again and again. The point is to achieve nirvana, or a state where you're not torn by fear or aversion or craving or desire, and you don't have to get thrust back into this life of suffering because you've learned the lessons in this lifetime. I'll leave the monks to meditate on that. But the teaching is that the bardo is not something that just happens after you die. It happens lots of times in your life. In fact, it happens when you experience grief, like I just went through with my mom, who I really thought was going to be here now. We worked so hard in keeping her safe and making all the things go into order, but then life happens, and you're like, what the fuck was that about? That's not how it was supposed to go. But reality doesn't care about your preferences. So now you're in the bardo, and you're between. You're between what you thought what was about and a place where you don't know what it's going to be yet. And this is the most the biggest time for insight about who you wanna be. So there's a time, this kind of, when forced upon us, this in between stage where we get to decide who we want to be and how we want to grow. So I'll leave that to you, and I'd love to hear that. And I do believe it is our collective responsibility to take that conversation and start them now, and be steadfast in not going back to business as usual, because that was what led to this fucking thing in the first place. Straight up. That's what led to this thing in the first place. There can't be any going back. There can only be health for all. There can only be health for all. Anyone who says they don't believe in universal healthcare believes at a fundamental level that some people don't deserve it. There's no other explanation for it. And that's its own virus that needs to be quarantined until it gets better, until we develop an immunity to it, because it's not true. It's absolutely not true. It's never been true. It's impossible to be true. I've seen it all over the world. Everyone deserves the best of what you have to offer. Everybody. Okay, so I'm going to go straight into meditation now. Those of you who've turned in for this as an update for COVID, I'll have a lot more to share on Wednesday. I think that is just going to be an update because I'm going to have to do it from the ER actually. So I'll just be here for like 15 minutes if I can find a break around 6 o'clock. No meditation. So I'm going to leave you with a bit of a suggestion. So apologies for those of you who know stuff like this, but I wanted to just be ER-like, physician-like in explaining what the practice of meditation or sitting can bring to you and how it can help us in that bardo that we're in decide what we want to take into this next life and how to grow in the ways that we always kind of hoped would become true. And now we know that we see glimmers of things that we love. The lakes are clearer than ever before. It's quiet, there are things to really take note on and figure out how to call those things forward with us into the future. So to have a sitting practice gives us the ability to know something fundamental about the way things work, And that happens, the reason why it's been so successful, particularly now in this modern time, is we need it more than ever, but also because it is consonant with scientific inquiry. And what I mean by that is that the Dalai Lama said, he's made this thing called the Mind Life Institute. What I mean by that is he said, listen, if science comes up with something that Buddhism can't reconcile, we'll reject it from our belief system. Because science is that powerful. He believes in it so much. But it keeps on happening that a lot of the things that it uncovers is true. A lot of the things that are uncovered are true. Their psychology and neuroanatomy kind of says maybe there isn't a self actually, and that's a fundamental insight in the Buddhist tradition. So there is this consonance with science. And the reason why it seems to be stand up is that it is just turning your attention on your attention and just seeing what it's made of. And that's it. And then the question becomes, is everything made of the same? Do the principles that make up me make up everything? That's an open question. We don't know. Maybe it's very different for non-alive things. They don't have consciousness, I don't know. But certainly it makes up me. So at least I can know something about myself by examining myself. So let me examine myself. And so in that way, the Buddha and people like him are this kind of like, they call them physicians, a great physician, examining yourself and seeing what you're made of. Okay, so now to the point. I'm going to give you a few fundamentals about what that looks like if you want to start doing something similar. So there is the integrity of the posture that gives you a sense of stillness. If you're shifting around and constantly getting up and doing that, that's typically your mind that's doing it. So you want to let your body settle so your mind can eventually have a place to land. Eventually it will land, And you would even notice a kid, shuffling and eventually sit still, and eventually just kind of settle in and they soften. So that's true of us. So we typically choose a position that's, that is comfortable for us, where we can feel stable and supported. It can be in a chair, it can be cross-legged. I typically kind of do like this kind of posture, so it feels stable. That's the first step. And I can post something in the notes about this, how to find a posture. The second is choosing your eyes open or closed. I would just suggest closed. If you feel tired, you can open your eyes. I think that's a safe piece of advice. And of course, there's nuances here that you can ask and I can answer another time. And then there's two things to pay attention to, coarsely, at first. Two things only. The external world and the internal world. So the external world meaning what is happening, that an objective observer who was sitting beside you could say, yep, that was a sound. Yes, that's a bird, or that's someone touches you and they could clearly see that there's a stimulus, a somatic stimulus. And those go to certain parts of our brain. And then there is the internal world, which for us is quite vivid. And it includes your lively inner life, your private life that I would know nothing of, except that you told me, or that I listen to music, or look at art, or read books, which is why that's so captivating, is we get to live another person's life. It's the only actual way, because we can't see what is happening within them. So there's two things to pay attention to, inner and outer. So that's what we're going to explore today. We're going to just kind of parse those out, inner and outer. Okay? And I don't know how we'll come to it in the meditation, but there is consonance between inner and outer. So there is sounds that you hear that are objective in the real world, that an observer could hear, vibrations in the air that your eardrums pick up. And then there is sounds inside your head that nobody can hear, that are no vibrations, as far as we can tell, that are just made up, okay? But there's consonants there, there's sounds, all right? Sounds inside, sounds outside. And there's sights. So the photons hitting on my eyes, the retinas, and the flashing in my mind's eye. And then the touch of the world of, feeling in my body, and then the emotional body, the feeling inside of me that is love and fear and anxiety and hope and peace and all those things. So there's consonants, but there is this kind of inside outside. Okay, so hey, that's what we're gonna go check out. We're gonna do it for not that long, because you talked your ear off so far. We'll do it for about 20 minutes or so, and then I'll leave you to practice that on your own, because it is That's how you start. I mean, yeah, meditation apps are cool, and I have friends of mine who do it, and I love them, and I would definitely want to support them, like Jeff and on Calm and Tamara and Sam and 10% Happier and all that. But you want to be able to do it all the time. You want to have that ability to know what the fuck is going on all the time. And I want you to have that kind of superpower, because it is where we learn how to grow most deftly. Okay, dope. Okay, so those of you who are going to stick around, do that, please. And those of you who need to sign off, I love you. Ryan, Ruben, namaste to you. All right. Get yourself into that comfortable position that I mentioned, the one that gives you a sense of I don't know, being supported. Being supported. So there's that, being supported, and there is just this kind of like, just bring this like good feeling into, hi Byron, good feeling into yourself for doing this. And this is a really special thing that you're doing, because you're not doing it for yourself. As you do this work, you get you become a more authentic person. You become a kinder, more authentic person. And then it gives people permission to soften around you. So you're really doing it. You're really doing it for other people. So you be proud of yourself and nice to yourself. And this isn't another thing to add to the list of a million things that you have to do that you're never going to get done. This is something that you do because you love. You love your loving thing. And this is something that you give to yourself so you can pass it on to other people. Okay. Enough talking. More meditating. So we'll start and finish with the bell. That's great. So here you are. The past is just like disappearing, like reams of fabric in a sewing machine. And the future is just never exactly going to arrive, and sometimes as far as miles away, and you're just this fine, this kind of needle edge of the present moment. So good for you for having this kind of courage at this time, with all of these kind of echoes of fear, good for you, really, to sit like this. It's often reported that Mother Teresa, no matter what she was doing, when the church bell rang, whether she was feeding a kid or not, she left and went to sit or pray, whatever her practice was. So we turn to this to kind of know ourselves and know how to nourish ourselves, because we're alive. And once we know it, then we can start to help others. A couple deep breaths. And with the inhalation, you can kind of get this kind of gathering of aliveness. This is like the air is just kind of rushing against me like the leaves of a tree. And that oxygen inside is just kind of popping off this ATP that is kind of just more or less the energy that you've caught from the sun in food form. And every time you take a breath, it's just this symphony of aliveness within you. At a subtle level, sometimes if you just pay attention, and maybe you can start to glimpse this on the out-breath, when things are quiet, there's almost a vibratory kind of feeling in the body, and not just in the body, sometimes that type of flow can move to your image space, or the sounds kind of like buzzing, champagne bubbles. That's the pregnancy of the present moment, kind of birthing itself again and again and again and again, effervescing. If that's not something available, it's not particularly available for me right now, but I bring it up because sometimes it's true. Okay, as promised, we're going to take a bit of a tour, a quick tour of what this place is. So if you're working with your breath right now, we're going to consider that something that is kind of somatic. It's like the outside world interacting with you. And I'm also going to include with that the feel of the cushion or the chair, the sofa. Your hands resting wherever they are. It's the touch of the planet. All right, some more wandering outside. We're gonna we're just gonna let everything kind of count here. So you can keep your awareness, it's there, your body and how it feels. And we're gonna move to what's happening outside our world in the auditory or sound space. Now, depending where you are, it could be quiet, could be sounds from the house if other people are there. Could also be this like really high-pitched sound, like a tinkling, high-pitched tinkling sound. It's not tinnitus, it's just your background noise of your cilia in your ears, just waiting to pick up on a vibration. Now, we're not so interested in the content of the sound. I mean, if you hear a car door slam, what'll typically happen in your awareness is a picture of a car will jump into your mind's eye. And if it does, that's cool, Or if your inner voice is saying, I should shuffle, or I wish he'd stop talking so fast. That's definitely okay. We're not trying to create something. We're just letting that kind of happen in the background as we explore the outside world. You can keep some attention on body and some in sound space. You can move back and forth. You can prefer one over the other. It's all good. If you're able to, you can just get lost in this outside world. You don't have to. You can, for a rare moment, just deprioritize the inner world and just like trip off the integrity of concentration. If, sometimes it's not there. Concentration is a trainable skill, and it's hard. One way to kind of work with it is just be really curious about your object of focus. How much of my body can I feel? How many can I send my sound kind of sense out in all 6 directions? Right, one last piece to add to this outside wander, external wander we're doing, and that's the visual piece. So I'm going to suggest, if your eyes are closed, just keeping them closed. Just because if you open them, I find that you get so much information that it kind of hijacks the other two. So what might be going on in your closed eyes? We're not really so much interested in the image of a car or a picture of your loved one that you're hoping to return to soon, or who's waiting on you for dinner. But just what's often kind of like a flashing kind of darkness of your closed eyelids. As your rods and cones kind of like refresh, scintillate. Now it's common that during this or any meditation, you're get called into this inner world that we live in so much. It's very useful for us. Create there and solve puzzles. Anytime you notice that happening and you're kind of lost, just, you got this anchor, right? You got sound, you got body, you got these black kind of backs of your eyes, eyelids. And the reason why this ends up being a useful kind of piece of knowledge is we can anchor there when we kind of feel like we'd like to take a bit of a rest from our busy mind. Like I said, it's not bad. But it does love puzzles. You may have noticed some things already just by, moving your attention in this kind of valence or direction. Is how integrated it is to the stimuli co-occur. So I just heard a seagull outside my window in Kensington, and an image of one popped up in my mind's eye and disappeared. That's good. For these last few minutes, if you want, you can just let your attention drop. No effort to keep it anywhere. Let the external world rise. Let the internal world do its thing. And have no preference for one over the other. as if you were kindly just watching, children at play, that attitude, amused and curious. Oh, this is me. Sometimes it helps to put a smile on your face, actually, even if you don't feel much like doing it. It just can make things a bit, reframe them. For the last part of this meditation, I'm going to ask you to, if you like, choose a phrase or something, a saying, could just be a single word that means something or you'd like to hear. I like to use one from Walt Whitman that says, "Clear and sweet is my soul. Clear and sweet is all that is not my soul." Or something that means something to you. Something that maybe evokes this kind of time that we're in and the hope that we have for these 20s to roar. What we want to see or who we want to be. And like a mantra, just repeat it to yourself. While the world does its effervescent thing through you, around you. You can let that go if you want. And just sit with the echoes of it. The feeling. Yo. Clear and sweet is your soul. Clear and sweet is all that is not. And, thanks for sitting with me. It helps my practice, and I like the chance to share this, because I know, we all feel alone, afraid sometimes. So this matters, that we get to come together and we do this kind of work, and creates a space that we all get to grow into, for me and for all the people who need that support. So I'll see you guys in a couple days. Like I said, it'll just be an update. I'd recommend tomorrow, if you're gonna do this kind of thing, you should do it tomorrow. This is my prescription for you. Do this tomorrow. Do the same cadence. So that means like become seated, and kind of let the visions of the past or the future kind of fade. Become seated, stable in your posture. Couple kind of like grounding breaths. And then you can listen to that meditation again, or you can do it yourself. You start with the breathing, and you're like, oh, I'm in my body. This is my body. Start to feel your body, the touch of the planet and on you, touching you. Add sound, the external world. Then, with your eyes closed, the appearance of the blackness in the backs of your lids. And then, once that's done, listen to a song, because your gain just goes up, and your sensitivity to everything kind of gets a bit of a boost. So check it out. See if you can do that. And I will tune into you on Wednesday. Dope. Okay. I'll see you then. Bye.